Emil, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, so I think the coolest thing to start off with as an introduction to what you do is the story behind it. So if we could start there, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. So it always starts with a story, right? There's always a story behind it all. So yeah, I love this story because it's very dear to me. So few years, about a year and a half ago, in January last year, I was in the train with my daughter, and she was playing with her iPad, and she's 4 years old at the time, and she's playing with her iPad, and all of a sudden Siri pops up for the first time, and she looks over to me, and she's like, "Daddy, what is this?" And I said, "Honey, it's Siri. It's like a friend. Ask it a question." And I said, "Honey, all you have to do is hi Siri and ask it a question." And she says, "Okay." So she goes and she says, "Hi Siri, do you have a mommy?" And then she asks Siri, "Siri, do you like ice cream?" And then she asks Siri these series of questions, and Siri, of course, has some funny responses and some stupid responses. And I don't think Siri was trained for 4 year old
Yeah.
asking questions about its mommy, right? But it was fascinating to me because about 10 minutes later, she says, "Siri, I love you. You're my best friend." And I was fascinated by that. And it was interesting. The people around us in the train were stopped what they were doing just to see this dialogue between the 4 year old and Siri. And they also understood that, wow, this is interesting what was happening. And, I have a degree in psychology. And when she said, "Siri, I love you. You're my best friend," I immediately saw, wow, my daughter went from having a transactional relationship, show me toys, to "you're my best friend,"
Hmm.
an emotional relationship. And that switch is very important in psychological terms, right? Um, it's like you're bringing it into you. And then that got me thinking about my daughter's future and what her world will look like in 50 years, and how her relationship with technology is so different from ours, where we're used to like Uber, I'm hungry, whatever, like bring me food. You know what I mean? For her, it's like, "Hey, how are you doing? You're my best friend." That's like, it just blew my mind that that's conversational as opposed to transactional. So then I was thinking, okay, Siri, it's like an interface. It has some database. It gets it. And then what if I'm Siri? What if one day she's speaking to me in this way, that she's like, "Hi, Daddy. I had a hard day at work, and this, that, and the other. What would Daddy do in this situation?" And if I'm able to provide that wisdom, that love forever. I guess that's every parent's dream, right? To be there for their children forever. And I think that's, and then I went on this journey of, okay, how do I put my wisdom, my thoughts, my story, my consciousness, if you want to call it that, into the cloud so that she can always access it, right? And that's how this mind bank began, right? It's a place, it's a bank to put your mind, and just like a bank account, when you pass away, your kids inherit whatever's in there, right? So in that context, it's very similar. But on the journey, I also discovered something that it has a lot to do with habit and engagement. How do we keep people really engaged into constantly putting data up there? And it comes down to the feedback loop. What do I get from it as a user as I upload this data? And it came down to understanding myself. As I upload my story, I self reflect on that period in time, and I say, wow, the story of my nanny makes me feel sad. Why? I love her, and then you start understanding these things about yourself, and growing through that, I think, and then that's where the data science comes in. That's where the cognitive science comes in to play with the platform. So that's how it all started, and more or less where we're going at a particular point in time.
What do you think was the switch that creates that emotional connection between the technology and the human? So when your daughter's messing around with it, where did that emotion come from?
My theory behind that, and it's one of the things that we're basically hypothesis testing with MindBank as a platform, is that voice plays a key role in this. The fact that you're not typing, like, first of all, my daughter can't type. Let's start with that. She's she's so kid, she can barely read at this point.
Right.
But the voice is a powerful thing, and one of the reasons, for example, was my bank. I want to keep it as a voice interface for now, at least for the foreseeable future, is because no 3D avatar, LiDAR, whatever technologies out there will replace the imagination in my mind. So me having a conversation with someone and I hear their voice, it immediately brings me back to that person, right? It's if you pick up a recording of your mom, you don't need your mom to see your mom. You have a picture in your head, which is so much stronger actually than something visual. And I think voice plays a key role in her perspective in that case. Because also, if you think about it from a child's perspective, it is a little bit like suspended reality, right? You're
Mm.
talking to this machine, and it's very imaginative. And I never asked her, but I wonder what I'm gonna ask her. Just give me an idea. I'm gonna ask her to draw who she thinks Siri looks like.
That's
Because
fun.
she's still young
Oh.
enough to kind of imagine a unicorn on the other side or something. So you just give me an idea, Robert. I'm gonna ask her to do that because we draw and we do sculptures all the time and stuff. So that's gonna be our next exercise. Like,
Love
let's
it.
draw Siri. It's gonna see what I'll send you a picture to see what comes
I
out
love
of it.
that idea. Yeah, no, that sounds great. It's interesting how important voice is. I mean, we started that way with the telephone, and for decades, that's all we had was that voice, but it's how we connected. And radio, even though it transformed into the podcast format, still remains very important. And then we're seeing this explosion with audio only apps like Clubhouse, and then you see the other socials pulling that in. So having that audio interface meet with the nexus of the improvements in machine learning to be able to have that understanding from voice to translation, that's really really fascinating. So the mind, I think from what I'm hearing you say, is going to fill in the color, but the relationship, it's been there always.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess it's also similar to like smell. If you think about it, you smell something and it brings you back, right? You just need to see the food, right? Just the smell is strong enough. So voice has the same power, and there's a lot of emotional data in voice too. The way people intonate things, the way people
Yes.
emphasize things. There's these little intricacies of voice that obviously you can't capture in text, right? Interestingly enough, though, when you see someone's handwriting has a very similar power to because if you see, let's say, I don't know, I'll give you an example. One of our advisors, his mother passed away a few years ago, and he said that he went to the house to clean up the house and the stuff and get rid of, sell the house, all these things. But he found his mother's diary, right? And he said he didn't even know his mother had diaries. And he's reading through her diaries from like 50 years ago when he was a boy and talking about him and the things that was going on in his life at that time. And he's like, and I could hear my mother's voice
Hmm.
as I'm reading her handwriting, and I think there's something about that we're not getting it from like typing, let's say, right? Because there's no emotional data from Arial font. It's your font and your handwriting. So I think voice plays a similar humanistic role that you can understand a lot of emotional value from someone's voice and it brings you back. I mean, like you can hear a recording from your kids when they were little, and it's just like, wow, just your child's voice when they were three. It's like, and it just brings you back to that time period. There's a lot of emotional value, which I think, to your point, voice data gives you, like podcasts and because you're kind of in the room, right? The clubhouse type effect. Like you feel like you're there even though you're not, right?
Right.
You're part of the conversation, which is interesting. It's a quite interesting psychological trigger there for sure.
The nostalgia that you're tapping into, that's such a powerful emotion. And uh, our generation, the older generations that are adopting the technologies rather than growing up with them, they're dialing into the now and maybe leaving a legacy. And it would be phenomenal to, one of the stories that you had on your website, a young lady was talking about how her father was super into tech. And that was a very emotive story around, he suffered a stroke and he wasn't able to communicate, had cognitive impairment, but she sees what you're doing as this great way to connect back into his dreams and the things that she wants to accomplish. And so if we have that nostalgic voice of our parents to be able to go back to, but when you're talking about your daughter, to hear a 3-year-old conversation, to hear a 10-year-old, a teenager conversation, a college student conversation, and to be able to, so when they're growing up with that technology and to be able to go back through the decades, that's an interesting use case as well as we move forward in time.
No, definitely. I think the power of this is exactly that. It's longitudinal data. It's my dad said something really interesting the other day. My dad's not in the tech at all, and he said, life is just a series of data points. Like he literally said that. He's like, life is a series of data points. If you look at your life, it's like the things you do leave something behind, kind of, right? And you have to look at it in that context as a whole, not as just a one point in time. And to your point, it's like, it's beautiful to see how someone grows, and it is all about personal development. Our whole mission is to help humanity move forward, literally. And it is that mixing of human and data, human and AI, right? And so, while many people fear AI, I embrace it. I think it's part of our evolutionary step. It's just like, you know, a prehistoric time going from a spear to a gun or something like this, right? It's like going from a rock to a hammer. You need to embrace it and you need to understand the tool and how to maximize it. And I think if we can combine the humanity and the technology into one, it's our, in my opinion, it's our next evolutionary step, literally.
What do you think is the difference between your optimistic mindset and the people that have fear around artificial intelligence?
I think it's very simple. You have a fear of the unknown. It's a psychological fight or flight type of reaction, right? I don't understand it, therefore I fear it. You see it with nationalism, you see it with xenophobia, you see it when it manifests itself in millions of ways. But by you understanding it and understanding its limitations, its complications, then you're better to deal with that fear. So I see it also. If you look back in history, every technology had its naysayers, right? I read an article from like the 1910 or something like that, when it was a point in time in New York City when the where they were going from horse-drawn carriages to cars, right? And you see what people were saying at that time, and they were like, "Oh, it's gonna kill everyone," and all this stuff, right? And then, like, you look at it today, what implications it had. I mean, people didn't realize that, horse-drawn carriages left tons of dung on the street, and there were horrible other implications to it, right? But no one saw that aspect of it, right? So you'll see it, if you look at airplanes when they first came out, people were terrified of these things. And now you take them like it's a bus. So it's.
I saw an old article once about the evils of the cement mixer and how using that automation was just a terrible idea. So yeah, you're right on point. It's I'm sure some people complained about the wheel when somebody figured that out.
I'm sure. I'm saying, what is this thing? It's blasphemous. But yeah, I guess I know Elon Musk. He has a lot of fear about it because he understands it too. And I think yes, it is. It's a powerful tool that in the wrong hands could do a lot of damage. Yes. At the same time, it's also a very powerful tool that can do so much good for the world.
Cars kill 1 million people a year, but we're not getting rid of those. We're figuring out how to make them safer. So we can do the same thing with AI. Reap the benefits while negating the negative aspects. I'm with you on that one.
And constantly, just like AI, constantly get better, right? That is literally like almost the meaning of life is to continuously improve. That's continuously improve on whatever is left behind, right? Leave your mark in the world and continuously improve. And if you look at machine learning and AI in general, that is its goal in life, to continuously improve and find the best optimal solution for things. And why not find the best optimal solution for yourself as a human? Like how much potential is in us that isn't tapped? There's tons.
Huge.
Like huge. And it comes from education, environment, trainings, experience, like a million things, you know. So if you can have a platform that could move humanity and help everyone in anyone part in the world, that'd be a beautiful thing. You know, like one use case I have, like my family comes from farming, like grandparents, right? Poor farmers in the Dominican Republic. Just to put into context, when my mother was born, they didn't even have a floor on the ground, right? It was just like they didn't have, it's just dirt poor, yeah.
Wow.
And he built a business, he built it up, did well for himself under the circumstances. But I was just thinking back in times, like, what if my grandfather had something like this and said, hey, this is the weather situation now. What should I plant for the best crop, right? And somehow, this would connect to different data sets and say, okay, based on the weather patterns and this and any other, plant corn this season because you're going to get this much yield and this much that, something as simple as this, or it's not that simple, but you know what I mean? Something, and that's a simple use case where I was like, wow, that could add so much value to so many people all over the world, right? It's possible. These things are possible. I just think there's, when I take a step back, it's like I look at it from the perspective of the everyday human. How do you understand yourself so that you can grow within, as opposed to have someone else help you grow, like, and as opposed to needing someone else's advice, and which is great to get other people's, let's say, support. But I feel that we're so disconnected from ourselves sometimes
Mm.
that in order to regroup and meditate and understand and walk through a problem yourself is very important to kind of go through it right by yourself. And that's what the platform I hope helps people do sometimes, just by asking simple questions of like, what's your favorite kid that what's the favorite food that your grandmother made as a kid? Just by asking that question, you automatically regress. You go through that process. You remember this, you remember that. That'll lead you off into another tangent, and hopefully help you, come back to where you are and be grateful for what you have. And there's so many other, implications of this, just the process of question and answer that could help humanity.
For people that fear that we have too much relationship with our technology, they eschew social media. They probably have a phone. Maybe they don't have a smartphone, but that's pretty rare nowadays. So, and it's always within reach. So even the people that are sort of anti-tech still have and use a lot of tech. But I could see someone making the argument that, okay, so if I put dad in the phone and dad answers a bunch of questions, because that's how your platform initially is growing, right? It's a Q&A sort of thing, and it gets to know the mindset.
Exactly.
What's is it only a sort of a ghost relationship after that? And I can imagine it getting almost perfect to where, like you said, that next future level is putting a replica of the mind in there. But as we get to that point, is there any challenges that possibly come up with engaging the phone with dad more than the physical form of dad?
Okay. Uh, I think let's look at it from a perspective of who the user, right? So, and to use your example, dad, I'm sure dad has some things that he wants to tell you that you might not be ready for at this particular point in time, or he's not ready to talk about at this particular point in time, right? At the same time, there's so many examples in life of people who cannot communicate with their relatives for a number of reasons, right? And there's a lot of guilt and a lot of hate, and they had themselves haven't been able to kind of surpass that. So, or in the case of divorced parents, there's always two sides to a story, and sometimes kids only get one side, right?
True.
So there's so many use cases where a repository like this could be beneficial for that relationship, right? It's not a replacement for, it's a conduit to,
Mm.
right? It's trying to get to that person. if you can have a conversation with your father, I think there's more underlying issues there than than the technology is not going to help you with, right? Hopefully, though, you know, the worst is that you have the regret that you couldn't have that conversation with him. You couldn't ask him those questions, and now that he or she is gone, you've lost that opportunity,
Hmm.
right? So I guess back to the example I showed about our advisor's mom. When, he didn't even know she had a journal. You know, but he's like he said, but for me that's like the most valuable thing for me, that I got to know my mom even deeper than I knew her before, right? And that's something extremely valuable that, can you put a price to that? For me, that's exponential. And also the other thing, just keep in mind that, okay, you might have a bad relationship with your father, but I bet you your kids would want to know about his or her life, right?
Yeah.
Like the grandkids are like, well, and or even, then you have to understand the value of data is relative too. You might not give a shit about your dad. Sorry, you might not care about your dad, but your grandkids would be fascinated about this person's story.
I had to just within the last 2 weeks, I was my daughter asked me a question about whose last name fit where. And I didn't know. Luckily, I was able to reach out to somebody in my family via social media and get an answer, but I would have been separated from that information. So I like what that word that you use, repository, is really good. And anyone that maybe fears this type of technology, it makes sense, right? So we had the diary. We have old letters in museums. We save photographs and paintings from 1,000 years ago. Well, even the first cave paintings that show the
Statues
beginning
and
of our
stuff. Yeah.
humanity. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all a conversation, and this is
Mm.
leveraging digital technology to continue the conversation moving forward. And it's just another aspect, the way I'm seeing it.
Oh, completely. Exactly. Exactly. And the beautiful thing about this particular one is that using and leveraging data, we can predict what the person might have said, even though that they never answered that particular question. Right. And that's where the challenge comes in, the deeper challenge, right? That conversational AI, that predictive analytics. That's where we're definitely not there yet, but I can foresee, us being there. And I always use the example of, like, if you ever go to a shop and, let's say you're buying someone a gift. There's those moments in times where you see a shirt and you're like, yeah, Robert would love this. This is totally his style, right?
Yeah.
What data set are you using to come to that predictive conclusion? It's all your experiences with Robert and understanding his style and what he likes and what he said and who he follows and whatever, and then you see the shirt and Robert's gonna be like, oh man, this is awesome. And those
Yeah.
are I consider that, like, we wouldn't want to get to that point with like what that would have said, right? And with some level of accuracy that we can be transparent about and say, I don't know, hopefully we can say something like, my vision would be that, Robert never answered this question, but he would have said this with an 80% chance of probability, for example,
Right.
and we're transparent about the score, and that would be great if we can get to that level, because, ultimately, this is, what would Dad have done? What would he have said? How could he or she help? That'd be great to get to that point, to get to that level.
So right now, what's your initial use case for your company?
Sure. The initial use case is for you to grow through self-reflection and live forever through data. Like, we want those two pillars to be like, to be the driving force of that, because the first step is, like, when you store your wisdom and store your life story, it becomes that repository. But then this data set should be valuable to you and to others. So for you, it's about understanding your cognitive state at this particular point in time. So just like we're saying, voice has a lot of emotional data. We can pull that data and actually show it to you. Does it make you feel sad talking about this topic? Does it make you feel happy? Um, sometimes you see topic clustering. So I don't know, I always do the joke that whenever you speak about your wife, you mention the word money a lot, right? And it's kind of, these things kind of go hand in hand, for example, or kids in school and whatever, you know?
Right.
So you start understanding what topics get interrelated, and you create a sort of what we call a mind map, which shows you where you are mentally for this particular question. And then there's also simple things like a word cloud, where you can visualize that question and understand that, you know, what has more weight than the others. And I attribute it to, it's just similar to like a running app. What I always say is very similar to like a running app where you go for a jog for 5K, let's say, or 2 mile run or something, and you saw that this particular time you were, you know, 5 seconds faster than the usual time, and that in some parts of the run you were slower than and faster than others. There's no massive value to you right there, right? But cumulatively, you see that you used to go do a 6 mile run. Now you're doing a 5 minute, you know, now you're doing a mile every 5 minutes. You have immediately, you have that in like personal reinforcement, right? This intrinsic reinforcement. It's not a high five from your friend. It's like, wow, I'm improving. You know, it's, and that constant improvement is also necessary, I think, for your mental state. You know,
Sure.
or am I being more compassionate in my speech now? Am I being more aggressive? And I think that's where, you know, our first AI model is psycholinguistic personality modeling, because we want to be the experts in the psychology of the language, not the functional natural language processing of the language. Because the NLP side of things is going to constantly improve. I mean, like every 6 or 8 months, there's a new technology coming out, right? First is GPT-3, then GPT-5, and
Hmm.
Google just came out with Lambda, and it's like, you know, tomorrow they're going to come out with some other thing. But the psychology behind language and the psychology behind personality and how that can be a basis for predictive analytics, that's really interesting for us. Extremely interesting, because that's like a baseline constant almost. While the technology keeps improving, keeps just getting better, but the psychology behind you evolve and you adapt, and but the personalities are very hardwired in the human at a very early age, you
Yes.
know, and these things just kind of adjust themselves a little bit. But you are who you are, and we embrace that. We're not here to change you. We're here to just show you who you are and have you learn. And hopefully, by you understanding who you are, you can also understand your role in society, your role around others, right? So, give an example, right? In my case, I did one of those psychological tests, and it found that I scored very low on empathy, which I was quite surprised actually, you know. And but then when I started analyzing it, I was like, yeah, I can understand that, because it was a context of work, right? And in the context of work, I'm extremely like performance driven, like almost like an athlete, right? Where if I expect like a high degree of professionalism, I expect you to be good at it. And if you're not good, you're not at the level that I need it to be, then I don't want you on my team, right?
That's fair.
And while others are more cooperative, let me train you, let me help you get to that level,
Which is
I'm
also
not that,
fair. Yeah.
which is also fair, but I'm
Yeah.
not that guy, and,
Right.
and I understand, my limits, right? So whenever good situations at work, when the company gets to where, okay, this person needs training and needs a bit more hand holding and needs a bit more softer touch, don't give them to me. It's like, there's other people on the team that would be a much better fit for that particular person. And I'm aware of that, at least, right? And I'm not here to change myself, but I'm also understand, okay, I need to be I try to be more empathetic, empathic rather, try to, or give it or hand it off. And I think this is so important for my own development, to understand my limits and understand my pluses and my minuses. And also in the context of team building, I understand, okay, I need someone like this with this type of personality because I don't have that. You know,
Absolutely.
so it helps you understand your role within a company, your role within the family, your role within society. And I had another beautiful example recently. So I'm really into the psycholinguistic things. I've done a lot of research on it, read a lot about it, and by no means I'm an expert, but I'm starting to see things very differently now. And my two brothers, I have two older brothers, and they're much older than me. And those guys are just clashing all the time. It's a classic case. I'm the little brother who kind of always keeps the peace with everyone, and everyone is cool with me. But then, these guys, every once in a while, I'm just like, come on, guys, shut up. You're both being idiots. But then I analyzed it recently with my older brother, and I was like, listen, man, the other guy, our other brother, he seeks a type of communication. He seeks truth in communication. He doesn't want you to tell him something. He wants you to show it to him. While you're seeking power all the time, where you want to tell everyone how much you're doing and how these things are happening, but you don't show it to him.
Hmm.
So don't talk about it.
Just take my word for it, kind of stuff.
No, just show him. Like proof is in the pudding. You just show him. And I think when you and it was really interesting. And then and as he was asking, we were having a discussion. I was telling him, like for example, you're saying these things, that you're fortifying your argument by bringing other things and other studies and other stuff. It's like you're trying to fortify your argument with external things. Once again, it's about showing it, not fortifying with something externally. And just in the language of our conversation, I was able to show him how his speech is really affecting the way the other person's receiving that information.
What do you mean by he's fortifying externally? Give me an example
so for example, if you have an argument of like, I don't know, let's say they're opening up the borders now because of COVID, whatever, vaccinations. And I was like, and I would say, I don't know that that's true. And he was like, go and Google it and do this. And then he would fortify his argument by bringing in other sources, right?
Gotcha.
So as opposed to, hey, here's the article, read it,
Right.
So this is just one bad example, but I mean,
no, it's solid because you see that in online dialogue a lot. People will just angrily tell rather than having an actual conversation, or by showing, or there will be they'll use only their side of the facts without providing the holistic argument. So what you're saying makes complete sense.
Yeah. And I guess, and it's really interesting, and I even see this. It got me thinking about use cases about families. So it goes back to your example earlier about the dad, where here's an example where I can see my bank telling both of these guys somehow, hey, when you talk to your brother, this is what he's looking for. Just be aware of that, right? If they allow this type of, let's say, privacy, whatever, but it would be such a powerful tool within a family, within a business, that if I understand that for this particular person, they're looking for this type of stuff, right? And you see this in companies already, right? Where they have team structure based on personality, Myers-Briggs, or whatever other frameworks that they use, because they understand that you want different people with different opinions, but you also want them to understand how to work, have to communicate with each other. They also have to understand each other.
Yeah, right? I mean, community.
Yeah, exactly. So it's quite interesting where this is going from that aspect of it, right? But it's I think there's so many use cases for it, right? There's mental health, there's personal development, there's Department of Defense. There's so many uses for a digital twin. That's the challenge for me at this particular stage is sticking to my guns on this one, right? Where I think we want to go to the consumer level first, where it's about people trying to improve themselves, mentally and have a better understanding of themselves, but also leave their story behind and leave that legacy for their kids.
Okay, so what I hear you saying, in the beginning, at least right now, it sounds like there's three parts. One is by the mere act of archiving myself, as it were, and getting that data feedback, I come to understand me.
Correct. Exactly.
Through that process, I also learn to communicate with others. So there's the relationship with myself, and then the relationship with the people around me. And then the third is the archiving for legacy. Is that where we're at right now? Is that accurate?
That's accurate. I would say it's more of step one, and step three, which is understanding myself and then archiving. Because the step two still needs some work from the platform perspective, but you definitely will understand your psycholinguistics. You understand your personality, right? How you interpret that personality in the context of others still yet to be discussed. It's still yet to be developed, right? So that whole social side of it is still something that we need to really develop. We haven't touched that point yet, but it's in let's put it, it's in the pipeline. It's in the works in terms of a seed has been planted internally for the roadmap because there is a social element to the platform. Just it wasn't in that context, right? It was more of like your family asking you questions about your life that you then store into the platform. Because my brothers are gonna have stories that's very particular to them, right? But now that we see that other element of it, I was like, wow, that's you as a human being are part of society, and that also dictates who you are. It's not just what's in your head.
I had a conversation with Dmitry Kaminsky from Deep Knowledge Group recently, and he's heavily involved in the longevity space. And one of the pieces of that conversation was around dealing with mental health because of the rapid pace of technological change and how that's increasing. Not only just what already exists, but then there's a new factor being introduced. And then you extend the lifespan, and we want people to be, he said the brain was the most important thing. And so being able to apply that, I can see where this technology using that first phase use case comes into real benefit as we move towards the, however you want to define it, but the singularity as our compute explodes.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because a part of the story with my daughter was the fact that I was getting my executive MBA at the time, and we had an assignment for our San Francisco module, and it was literally come up with a product for the aging population. And that put me in a context of looking for an idea for this particular solution, for this particular problem. And the moment with my daughter was the inspiration of that.
Mm.
It wasn't like I was looking for that concept. I don't know if I would have come to that conclusion if I would have had that, if I wasn't looking for that solution, right? So in my head, it was already like, how do I find the problem to this? My daughter happened. I was like, boom, this is so cool. This is it. Because it is that. I think, physiologically speaking, we will not live forever, but our mind, our consciousness can, you know. And he has a point to that. And there's some, there's a lot of things happening in the longevity space to extend the lifespan of humans physically. But I really think that we're organic creatures, and it's just not in our nature to be around for hundreds of years. But maybe someone will come up with a solution to fix that and slow down aging. But definitely the mental health situation and the acceleration of technology, I think, is not so much the issue. I think it's more of the separation of people is more of the issue.
What do you mean by that?
We choose to have difficult conversations through text as opposed to sit in front of the person and say, "Hey, this is what's going on."
Yeah, I've heard of the whole breakup over text thing. That's pretty brutal.
It's not only it's or even worse, ghosting, where you just don't even break up with the person. You just disappear.
Yeah.
So I think the culturally, like, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but I think it's definitely a generational thing where people are having a very tough time having difficult conversations with people because they fear confrontation possibly, or they fear what the other person might say, or they maybe fear what they will hear about themselves from that person. I don't know, but I think the technology could also help with that very much, right? If you can, back to the whole self-development, personal development, if I understand I'm not an empathetic, like I don't have empathy, then I try to show more empathy, if I am a person who tries to be better than I was yesterday. If you're content with who you are and you're happy, you think you're a perfect human being, the pinnacle of evolution, then you're probably not right for this platform, right? You're not looking, that's not the role that this platform will have in your life. But if you're constantly trying to be better, you're constantly trying to improve, then definitely I think, having that conversation with yourself first and come into grips with some things will probably help you then speak to others better. At least that's the hope. Um, there's a whole psychology about journaling and getting through issues, right? Just by going through them,
Yes.
doing the process of going through them, talking about it, even if it's to yourself, there's a healing process there. Um, so, I think the longevity space, the aging space is fascinating. The mental health space is where we're playing in to some extent, where we want to be able to predict Alzheimer's. You were touching upon the longitudinal stuff, right? This kid that uses it from 5, 10, 15, 20, and on and on. If we have the data and we see the variances of your answers over time, if there's a big variance in that answer, then we'd say, hey, Robert, you might want to get checked up because it looks like you're forgetting stuff.
Hmm.
And the process of dementia it's interesting because sometimes you see it coming, right, and sometimes it comes at you really fast.
Yeah, I have a extremely close family member that it felt almost instantaneous.
Wow.
Yeah, and then
crazy,
it went from radically altered behavior to almost like a locked in scenario where she just disappeared. So yeah, I could see where having earlier detection would be of huge benefit.
Exactly, and that's where we're looking into from one of our pillars is health and mental health specifically cognitive health. So that's the first one because there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of studies. There's a lot of even algorithmic models to help with that, not only from variances in answers, but uh, variances in intonation, just literally from the emotional and the texture of the voice, right? Even there's models about that. So this is something that's fascinating. We're going to definitely dive into because there's a huge need for that. And just to put it in perspective, when we were doing our study in market analysis, we found that 46% of people fear the loss of memory. That's like their biggest fear,
Wow.
losing their memory.
I mean, it's who we are. Yeah.
And it's not only who we are, but back to your role in society, it's who they are as well. If your dad forgets if God forbid, one day I forget who my daughter is,
Yeah.
that hurts her more than it does me, I mean, sure, like, I'm not even getting,
Yeah. How can you
I'm like
mourn what
getting
you've
goosebumps,
forgotten? Yeah.
and it's like, imagine losing someone that you love, but then physically being there, and you're not that person for them anymore. It's extremely difficult, extremely sad. So at the very least, can this platform help with that? Can this platform help you go back in time and still have that conversation with your father that you can't have anymore?
Yeah.
That's something that I hope for, really, because people need it, like, God forbid that happens to me one day, right? It's like I said, I want to be there for her forever, even if I physically cannot be there for her. That's my goal, right? That's the driving force behind this.
I don't think we could end this any more elegantly. How do people find you and find out more about what you're doing?
So please just it's very simple. Go to mindbank.ai, or you can email me directly at emil@mindbank.ai. I'm open to talk to everyone and anytime and everywhere. So I speak 6 languages too. So if you want to speak in Spanish and Italian and Portuguese and Czech, by all means, send me a message.
One of the things I love the most about this podcast is being able to connect with highly intelligent people. Now, I found you also on LinkedIn. Are you active on any other of the socials?
LinkedIn is my main platform. To be honest with you, everything else for me is very personal. So like Facebook, I am somewhat active on Facebook, but not really. Twitter, no. So just really LinkedIn. I try to keep professional and my personal life very separate. So
I understand.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was educational and inspirational, and I wish you the best of luck. What you're trying to accomplish does good things for the world, and we can always use that. So thank you.
And thank you, Robert, and thank you for the support. And you're also a part of the story. So thank you for the support.